Brick and Laura. Brick and Laura, can you hear me? Brick and Laura, can you hear me?
Can you unmute the cell phone one and see if they can hear with that, or they have to unmute it?
I can't unmute anyone.
Huh?
I can't unmute anyone.
Okay. Can you text them?
Yeah.
Did you let folks in yet, or we're still waiting to
No,
let
I'm
folks
just
in?
making sure they're ready to go before. But I have to start letting people in soon.
Jerry, thanks for sharing the photos of Friday's event.
Oh,
Looked,
okay.
looked great. It was great. A
Yeah,
lot of
it
work.
was it was a really good event.
Yeah, it
Really
was.
good. She was very happy.
Good to see. Big smile.
Yeah, smiling from ear to ear.
Yeah.
Um, can they see the chat?
I'm looking.
Any suggestions? Because we do have to start letting folks in.
Hi, can you hear me? I can't tell if that's.
Brick.
Can the people at Warner hear me okay?
It's not.
Mm.
Hello?
Hi, can you guys hear me? Lynn, Rebecca, anyone there? Brick?
Mm.
Brick, can you hear us? Brick?
Daria, start letting folks in and we'll just tell them we're trying to get them on the phone. Get them,
Okay.
get
Gotta
the,
keep trying.
yeah. Hey, everyone. If you could just give us a minute, we seem to be having a little bit of trouble getting the Warner folks on to hear us. So we'll start in a few minutes. Can
Rick and Laura, can you hear us?
Thank you.
Maybe you should turn Zoom off on the phone. Maybe you should turn the phone Zoom off. Turn it off completely? Yeah.
So the folks at the Warner Society are hosting this meeting today, or this discussion today, and they were on for a minute ago, but I'm not sure what's going on right now. I'll just give them a couple more minutes to see. And then we'll probably get started without them. Is everybody doing good today? Just do a thumbs up.
I'm doing good. I don't know if the sound is on or off.
Yeah, I can hear whoever just spoke. I can hear you. That's great.
Oh,
Can you hear
okay.
me?
I
Yes.
can hear you, but I wanted to turn off my sound.
Okay,
Okay.
you're free
Thanks,
to.
Barbara. You can
I
hear
don't know.
me when I'm through the computer.
Brick,
Okay, I'm
I
on
can
my
hear you
phone.
now.
Just trying to figure out. Okay, mute. All right,
Brick,
so
are
good.
we ready to start?
Yeah, I'm going to try.
No longer connected to this than this.
Mhm.
Okay, so we need to hook the computer up to the screen.
Oh, okay.
Lynn, I can hear you now.
Yes, I'm going to talk through the computer,
Okay,
and we have the microphone so people behind me can hear.
okay.
This is as far as this goes.
Okay, while we work on our screen here, I'd like to, my name is Lynn Clark. I'm a retired director of the Warner Historical Society, and my compatriot and fellow researcher of decades, Rebecca Corser, also retired former director of the Warner Historical Society, is here as well. And we would like to invite you and welcome you to this talk, all of those of you on Zoom and those of you sitting behind me in the
Recording in progress.
We'd like to thank you for joining us today. Rebecca and I have done research on rural Black individuals living in New Hampshire for, like I said, for decades. And that we'd like to point out today specifically the folks that are highlighted on our Black Heritage Trail marker, which is right downtown next to the Soldiers Monument, because we're pointing out that there are 4 names of Black soldiers that have been on the Soldiers Monument all along, whether people realize it or not. Ichabod Twilight, who was a Revolutionary War veteran, William Bradish from the War of 1812, and cousins James and John Haskell, who were in the Civil War. So for those of you who are here today, maybe you can stop by and see that right downtown, and anyone who might be visiting Warner in the future, come on by and check it out. And without further ado, I'd like to turn you over to the director of the Black Heritage Trail, among her many jobs and accolades, who has been really, really responsible for spreading awareness of Black history outside of the seacoast. She's gotten us all involved, and we're very happy to partner with the trail on programs like this and our walking and bus tours around Warner. So Jerry Ann Bogus.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and thank you everybody for joining us. And I want to thank the Warner Historical Society for hosting this event today. I want to thank everybody for being nimble enough. Those folks who were going to join us in person, due to some unforeseen circumstances, we were not able to be there. But with technology being what it is, we are able to still continue our program. I want to also thank my staff, Daria and Jake, for the work they're doing to present this. This is what we're calling an expanded Tea Talk. It is, we started this series. This is one of a part of 6. We started this back in February, and it was inspired by Sun Tzu's The Art of War. To this series is called The Art of War, Conflict, and the African American Philosophy. And we started in Portsmouth and have carried it on through the fall into Manchester and in Warner. Today's talk, Hope and Impediments, War and Strategies for Belonging, is focused on really highlighting how, rather than passively accepting their imposed status, Africans and African Americans involved in early wars like the Revolutionary War and the Civil War were both an offensive strategy and a spiritual defense against a society that deemed them inferior. With the other talks, we started the first talk with looking at the an African philosophy on war, surviving enslavement and citizenship. And the next one was this one that we did in Portsmouth. The third was the Great Migration, military service, and shaping of a diversified New Hampshire. And the fourth one was Eye on the Prize, protests, movements, and the road ahead. If you're interested in any of these that complete this series, they're on our YouTube page. This work presents a unique framework for examining how African-American philosophies of war, strategies, resilience, and collective action have shaped the African-American experience throughout the centuries. And each conversation has deepened our understanding of who we are, how we got here, and ways in which we can move forward into the future. We know that next year will represent the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And the Black Heritage Trail wanted to really look at some of these strategies before the celebration, because there's been a lot of controversy about who belongs and who doesn't belong in our country, who the Declaration of Independence was written for and who it was not included. So we thought we would have these conversations. And I'm really Pleased to be doing this in Warner. As Lynn says, we have a lot of Revolutionary War veterans and other wars that are represented there in Warner. So we look forward to hearing from our presenters on their stories that they will share today. And while these anniversaries celebrating the 250th invites us to celebrate the idea of freedom, we know that in today's environment, it also calls us to reckon with the enduring legacies of colonization, enslavement, and systematic inequalities. In taking our tea talks on the road, and if anybody can come up with better title than an expanded tea talk series, we would love that. We've been trying to figure that one out for ourselves at the trail at our meetings. So open for suggestions. In our talks, we honor a legacy of truth-telling and dialogue, which also recognizes the history we explore and realize that they're not confined to one place. This history, African American history, belongs to all of us. It is not just for African Americans, but it is American history. So as we join this dialogue today, encourage you to ask questions as we listen to our presenters to hear their stories, some personal, some reflection of research. Nevertheless, points to this long hidden stories of African Americans participating in being good citizens of this country. So without much ado, I'm going to pass you on to our moderators so we can get started. And we're honored today to have with us Brick Moles from the Warner Historical Society and Laura Russell, a retired educator, hosting this event. So I'll pass it on to you, Brick.
Thank you, Jerry Ann. Laura Russell and I began our teaching careers in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia area in the mid-1980s. And as young history and social studies teachers, we were both fortunate enough to have wonderful mentors and colleagues who helped set us on a path that shaped our educational philosophies and influenced our curriculum development. Roughly beginning after the Second World War and coinciding with the later 20th century civil rights movement, scholarship had begun to question the paternalistic narrative of earlier historians, such as Ulrich Phillips, who had depicted slavery as a benign institution and essentially ignored the perspective of enslaved people in favor of presenting the slave owner's point of view. Black historians such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Carter Woodson had already countered this interpretation with their focus on the enslaved people and their ways of creating their own culture and shaping their own destinies despite being enslaved. It took a while for white historians to catch up. In the 1950s, only a few years after the Brown decision, Kenneth Stamp and Stanley Elkins each placed their focus on the enslaved persons, shifting away from the master's perspective and focusing on victimization and its effects. By the 1960s and 70s, no doubt influenced by the civil rights events of their time, historians like Eugene Genovese and John Blasingame went further and argued that enslaved people developed their families, their culture, and their faith within the realities of bondage. Later historians would explore ways that enslaved people resisted their oppressors in subtle ways and therefore created a degree of agency. These new perspectives found their way into secondary schools about the time that we began our careers. This is why Laura and I became committed to teaching history that included the perspectives of people who had been ignored, erased, or exceptionalized, and therefore minimized. We are proud to be here today and to learn more from our visiting scholars. And let me tell you a little bit about them. Glenn Knobloch is an independent scholar and an author of over 20 books. Knobloch has served as the main military contributor to Harvard and Oxford University's landmark African American National Biography. He has also written for the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History. His work documents a wide variety of subjects in New Hampshire and New England history, including African American history, historic cemeteries and grave markers, as well as covered bridges, the Kankamangas Highway, and New Hampshire's loon population. He holds a BA in history from Bowling Green State University. Bob Shepard, a former broadcast journalist, lecturer, and author of Maine's Tuskegee Airman, A Son's Perspective, has also co-produced a documentary that chronicles his father's journey from New York City to Tuskegee, Alabama, and his service in Italy during World War II. We are pleased to welcome both of these scholars to our program. And now I'll turn it over to Glenn.
Thank you very much, Brick. I appreciate your comments, and so happy to be here and presenting for the folks in Warner. I have the utmost respect for what Lynn Clark and Rebecca Corser have done. I think Warner in many ways serves as a model for rural towns that want to explore their Black history and bring it to life and bring it to the public eye. So I am so proud of what they have done and appreciate all their hard work, and can't say enough about them. For myself, I've been documenting Black military history for nearly 30 years now. It seems to be a never-ending task because there's always more to be uncovered. Black service, for example, in New Hampshire dates back to Queen Anne's War, well before the American Revolution. Again, other than some of my work, has not been explored too heavily and is actually still remains on the fringe. It's not something that is taught, and that's that. Hello? Okay, not something that is still regularly taught in many of our schools. So, in conjunction with the New Hampshire Humanities and programs with the Black History Trail New Hampshire, I'm always happy to present this work. And what we're going to talk about today, of course, 250th anniversary of the American Revolution's beginnings this year. We have to talk about African American service during that war. And that's what we're going to talk about today. All of this is based on my book, Strong and Brave Fellows, which I wrote, over 15 years ago. But all that information is still apropos today. And it is quite surprising for many people to realize that African Americans, both free and enslaved, took part in the war and helped New Hampshire and the rest of the colonies gain their freedom. Let me see, I got some technical glitches here. Sorry about that. See if we can get this going here. I like to show this picture, especially for those of us who are old enough to remember the bicentennial, for example, way back in 1976, when all sorts of merchandise was sold showing images like this. And I always like to ask people today, what's missing from that image? And of course, that's the African American participation in our war. As Brick alluded to in the introduction there, this myth that it was a largely white conflict was really perpetuated by our earlier generations of historians. And I would argue to some extent is even going on to this day. We're not fully yet where we need to be, not just in the American Revolution, but in all of America's wars, fully recognizing Black participation. It's interesting that in New Hampshire, colonial laws dating back to 1719 prohibited Black service. As you can see on the screen there, quote unquote, idiots, lunatics, Negroes, and Indians, not considered equal classes by any means, were prohibited from serving in militia regiments. However, these laws were ignored, and local muster masters in each and every town raised the men that they needed. We have few examples in some seacoast towns where Black service was initially denied based on race, but in most cases, Black men, both free and enslaved, were welcome, primarily because New Hampshire needed troops badly. And to raise those, they knew that they were going to have to depend on every able-bodied man. I might also mention that the muster masters in these towns, in most cases, knew these Black men personally, knew their character and perhaps their abilities, and said, hey, despite your skin color, we will accept you. It is interesting also to note that the father of our country, George Washington, upon taking command of the American Army after the Battle of Bunker Hill, tried to stop those enlistments. Okay, that's a fact. His efforts failed in that effort, in those orders, and despite his orders, his officers remonstrated with Washington and said, hey, these are men that we've enlisted. We need them. We need all the men we can get. Washington eventually kind of acquiesced and said, we'll take what Black men have been enlisted now, but no others. And you know what New Hampshire did? We ignored that order and we continued to enlist Black men, over 100 of them, to serve. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but for New Hampshire, which had an enslaved population on the eve of the American Revolution of just over 600, and a fairly small free Black population, that's a fairly large percentage of troops. And these cross the spectrum, okay, wide range of life experiences. We have a free Black, multi-ethnic Wentworth Cheswell. His signature kind of rivals, I think, John Hancock's. I like to call him John Hancock of New Hampshire, really. And then we have Caesar Wallace in the middle there from Rye, illiterate, couldn't sign his name. And of course, we have a former Warner resident at the bottom there, Ichabod Twilight, formerly, we believe, enslaved in Massachusetts, later living in Warner, served in the war for a brief period. And then Michael Sudrick there, a basket maker and a free Black from Dover. So wide range of experience among these men. Why did they serve? That's always the overriding question, especially for the enslaved. We know from some of the documentation and newspaper articles of the day that in many cases these men were patriotic. Even though they may have been enslaved, they did see the British in many cases as their enemy. For those that were enslaved, however, it was a more practical thing. It was a chance, not a guarantee, a chance at gaining their freedom. And of course, this depended on their master. There's also pay involved. All soldiering duty has to do with pay. That's one of the perks of joining the military. You can be patriotic, but it's also a good paying job. And in this case, there was a bounty paid for men to sign up. There was bonus money, and there was the promise of reward after your service was over, assuming you survived. For the enslaved, especially, it was a chance for a change in scenery. Instead of the drudgery of farm work or whatever work they may have been doing for their enslaver, it was a change of scenery. And in many cases, it was better than their current living conditions. We do have evidence that some of that service was coerced. We have Boston Bell of Londonderry, for example, would sue his master after the war, claiming that he was sold into the Continental Army service. However, desertions, disciplinary problems were largely non-existent among the Black soldiers of New Hampshire. We see more of those among the white soldiers. I'll give you one example. Early in the war, when one New Hampshire regiment did not get enough food, or what they felt was enough food and rations, most of the soldiers in these companies deserted and refused to serve, not the Black soldiers. Again, they were used to going without, used to having less. There were also those individuals who were manumitted on the eve of the war or just prior to their service. Manumission papers in New Hampshire that have survived to this day are extremely rare, but in Dover, we know of 2 examples. We also have Prince Whipple in Portsmouth. But imagine the power of this piece of paper. This paper belongs to Cato, late servant, a euphemism for the enslaved, to Otis Baker, but now free. And this document has survived for a long time because it was important to Cato Baker. And interestingly enough, he was freed under the preaching influence of Reverend Jeremiah Belknap in Dover. And this document eventually ended up in the Massachusetts Historical Society because its founder was also Reverend Jeremiah Belknap. So we would suspect that Baker and his descendants could appreciate what his influence. We talked today about African Americans asserting themselves in a wartime situation. And the best I can tell you in this is they asserted themselves by being the very best they could be and demonstrating by their actions that they were honorable men who deserved to take part in the war. It's often misunderstood. Many people to this day, even New Hampshire town historians, believe that African Americans that served in the war were only waiters to officers. That is patently untrue. Men like Reuben Roberts from Newmarket served for 8 years. Jude Hall, Exeter, 7 years. All of these men served as rangers. They served as regular foot soldiers. They served in the artillery. Some of them served in elite handpicked regiments. Some men were sent to join Lafayette's army during the maneuvers against Cornwall in Virginia in 1781. 3 men from New Hampshire, okay, Cato Fisk, Caesar Wallace, and London Daly were actually received the badge of merit personally from George Washington at the conclusion of their service for their long service and dedicated service, okay? This is a president, a future president, by the way, that in the beginning did not want Black soldiers. So he certainly changed his mind a little bit anyway. Portsmouth Prince Whipple served during the Battle of Rhode Island, but would not gain his freedom afterwards, after his military service ended. How did he assert himself to his master? He signed the petition for freedom that was signed by about 20 enslaved men in Portsmouth that was sent to the New Hampshire government at the time, making that very point that here we have a country that's fighting for its liberty while we still have people in bondage. It's important to remember, though, and this is one key takeaway, not every enslaved African American who helped America gain her independence, and let's make no mistake, that's what these soldiers did, were freed themselves after the war. Caesar Wingate in Rochester, for example, was still enslaved after the war. Thomas Duncan of Grantham served for 3 years and almost 20 years later was still enslaved. We have to know that New Hampshire never specifically abolished slavery on its own. It never happened, not till the 13th Federal Amendment. So that is extremely important, and it's something that New Hampshire scholars and folks argue about. It's a fact. Post-war life for these veterans was not always easy, okay? The economy was in a free fall. Many Black veterans had to eke out a living. Many of them, despite their service to our country, were not wanted and were warned out of their town. The practice of warning out undesirables in town. This happened in Exeter, Portsmouth. It happened in Gilmanton, where Caesar Wallace, who received the badge of merit from General Washington, was warned to leave town. These veterans would not receive a pension until 33 years after the war ended. Many of them had died by then. So to say that they were treated with respect, not always the case. However, for the town of Warner, we do see some examples. Anthony Clark of Warner and also Sutton as you said there, probably did more towards instructing the young people in the arts and graces of politeness and good manners than any other man of his day and generation. That's by the Sutton town historian, Augusta Worthen. He served for Massachusetts in 1779 and again from 1781 to 1783. It's important to note that one of his grandsons would serve in the Civil War. That's the one thing we often forget too. There is a history of generational service among African Americans from the American Revolution down through the Civil War and even beyond that. We've already talked about Ichabod Twilight and how important he was, and also William Bradish. Again, it's not just the American Revolution, well, the War of 1812, in this case, William Bradish, the son of a formerly enslaved man from Litchfield, and many of America's other wars here. So when we talk about freedom and things like that, it's Black soldiers that helped to fight for that. We're not saying that they were the most important, but they are just as important as all of our other veterans, no matter what their skin color. It is interesting, African Americans did try to fight back and organize for their rights, as referenced by this ad that appeared in Exeter in 1817, long before the NAACP was established. London Daly, who was present at West Point and saw the hanging of the spy, Major John Andre, he would later try to organize in his town. And so I beg of people to recognize this history. And we have to know that the American Revolution is quite fascinating. It's first and only conflict until Vietnam, where soldiers from the North served in conditions of equality. They used the same weapons, received the same pay, the same bonus money, the same uniforms. But we also all know the Revolutionary War was unfinished business. Okay. Our founding fathers failed in that area, and that would not be resolved until another much bloodier conflict. And as I remind people, I'm probably preaching to the choir on this talk, it's not quote unquote revisionist history to tell the entire story about African American history. We need to be inclusionary. It's not disloyal for teachers to teach about racism and its impact on momentous events like the American Revolution. We cannot understand our history if we do not tell the whole story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenn. It's a pleasure to be here. Let's see if we can get some things going here. Bear with me for just a minute. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and to be able to follow Glenn's fascinating story with some really amazing documentation of telling a little bit about New Hampshire's independence and a reminder that we really have a less than satisfactory history here in this country of the way we treat our veterans, regardless of the color of their skin. So mine is a very personal story. It's a story about courage, of determination, and overcoming adversity. And that's a picture of my dad with his foot up on the tire of a P-51 Mustang somewhere in central Italy in 1945, late 1944, early 1945. He has that pilot swagger that we know from Hollywood movies and television, but make no mistake about it, James Shepard was not a pilot. During the war, he was a maintainer. He was an engine and airframe mechanic. He was the guy that could give thumbs up or thumbs down in the morning and tell the pilot whether or not they would be flying with a particular mission. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about his history, a little bit about the history of the Tuskegee Airmen that I've been able to gather over the last 15 years or so in putting together a presentation and talk a little bit about the documentary that I use that talks about the story of the Tuskegee Airmen as well. So one of the things that I've noticed and have integrated into my presentations this year, it's kind of interesting as we talk about the anniversary of the United States of America next year coming up, is that it's we're now 80 years out from the end of World War II, and there have been lots of ceremonies of late. And I've got a picture a little later of a Tuskegee Airman we know who is still alive, who participated in some events in Italy. So 80 years ago was the end of World War II. 80 years before that was the end of the Civil War. So a lifetime between the end of the Civil War and World War II, and then a lifetime from the World War II to today as well. So they're very fortunate that I've been able to talk to some of these people, get to know some of these folks, and be able to share some of their stories as well. So African American roles, as Glenn had mentioned, were somewhat limited. African Americans have served on every major conflict on this continent, but usually frontline roles. And more recently, they've served as cooks, as waiters. They handled munitions or shoveled coal. There were really, before the outset of World War II, there were only a handful of black Army officers in the country, several of whom had gone through West Point, the military academy. But all but one of those men served in the chaplain corps. So their ability to move up and to assimilate into society was rather limited. At the same time, though, there was a growing number of middle-class blacks who wanted more. They wanted to serve as an officer, as their white counterparts were, and they were ready to fight. They wanted the right to fight for their country as well. And some of them, realizing the role that aviation would likely play in the Second World War, wanted to serve as pilots. And there were black pilots as far back as the First World War, even though they never really got a lot of publicity. And that meant that they had to hold rank, which meant they would either be a first lieutenant or they would be a captain as well. The problem was at the time that the prevailing forces in the Pentagon were resisting the idea of Negro officers serving over white enlisted men. So there was very strong pushback. In fact, there was even a in-depth study that came out in 1925 that said that Negroes were incapable of training and serving as officers. But there was a lot of pressure. There were organizations like the NAACP. There were black newspapers around the country. There were labor unions that and civil rights activists who were all pushing for integration in the military and also for more roles for blacks in the factories as they were gearing up for war. The newspapers put something together called the Double Victory or Double V campaign, which was an effort to try and encourage black men to enlist for the military as well. And there was a great deal of pressure on the White House that led in 1940 to President Roosevelt signing an executive order allowing colored men to be trained as military pilots. Now, nearly all of those who qualified, they took a test, had to score above a certain rank, were college grads or undergrads, and they came from across the U.S. And this is an early photo of some of the pilots that were enrolled at Tuskegee Army Airfield and Moton Field in Alabama. And just by coincidence, there are two of these aircraft, Stearman biplanes, here in New England. One of them has been at the New England Air Museum outside Hartford, Connecticut for about the past 10 years. And just last weekend, I was at a speaking engagement in Hudson, Massachusetts at the American Heritage Museum, and they just acquired one of the Boeing Stearmans, and I actually got to take a ride, and it is documented that that plane was used to train pilots at Tuskegee Army Airfield. But this picture that appeared in newspapers from coast to coast in 1941 helped significantly helped to move the needle in terms of the public perception. Eleanor Roosevelt was making a goodwill tour through the southern states, and she diverted to Tuskegee, and against the protests of her security team, flew with the gentleman who was in charge of the civilian training program at the university, Chief Charles Anderson. And that made a huge difference because it helped to allay fears that African Americans were not qualified to fly at that point. So this is a picture of my dad, a photo that he sent back to his parents after he went through basic training in Long Island and was headed down to Alabama. He grew up with people like Charles Lindbergh, Amelia Earhart, Bessie Coleman as his heroes. The people that he grew up with at that time in New York, they were all into sports fans and people in the movies as well. All the time when he was growing up, living in Harlem, he dreamed of being a pilot. And he was very fortunate in that they had a magnet school, and he took the qualifying exam and was accepted in a school called Harran Aviation High, which still exists in New York, and trained young men and everything they needed to know to fly and maintain and navigate modern aircraft. And he learned about the Tuskegee program, and when he turned 19, he volunteered and then headed off to Alabama as well. The initial class of 13 students was in 1941, but only 5 men graduated. This is a picture of them. The gentleman in the front corner, smiling down front, is Lemuel Custis. Lemuel Custis came from Hartford, Connecticut, and after the war, he came back. He was the first African American state trooper in the state of Connecticut, and then he worked for a number of years in the state treasurer's office as well. But the gentleman of import in the back, left-hand side, with the stern look on his face and the pencil-thin mustache, is Benjamin O. Davis Jr. And Benjamin Davis Jr.'s father was that other African American general in the U.S. Army that wasn't in the chaplain corps. Ben Davis Jr. went to West Point, served for 4 years at the military academy, and was ostracized by his fellow students. He ate at a table in the corner of the cafeteria, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. His classmates had roommates, but for Ben Davis, they converted a custodial closet into his bedroom. And during the 4 years that he attended school, they didn't call on him in class, and they really had very little interaction with him at all. But he endured those hardships at West Point and rose above the personal slights to go on to earn his wings, and then later became the first African American commander of the 332nd Fighter Group, which is actually the technical term, the military term for the Tuskegee Airmen. They're called the Red Tails and the Tuskegee Airmen as well, but really it's the 332nd Fighter Group as well. And later on, Benjamin Davis was influential in convincing folks at the Pentagon that they needed to divert the Red Tails from harassing ship convoys and going after trucks and railroad cars to do the job that they were trained for all along, and that is to escort the bombers. Uh, and that was important because this is a picture from the George Lucas movie uh, Red Tails. The German fighters were downing significant numbers of bombers. We were sending up in some cases, 100 to 300 bombers a day, and a B-17 bomber like that green plane in the photo had 10 men in it. So we were losing significant numbers of men in B-17s and B-24. So the Tuskegee Airmen were in the right place at the right time. Most people, though, are unaware that in addition to the fighter pilots, there were also Tuskegee Airmen who served in the bomber crews as well. There were 2 squadrons of Tuskegee bombers who never got to deploy overseas because none of the existing fighter groups and bomber groups in the U.S. Air Force wanted them to come overseas. So they spent most of their time training all across the country, transporting aircraft, training paratroopers and the like, and doing a lot of other transport jobs during that time. One of those gentlemen is Daniel Keel, who was a gentleman who grew up on a farm just south of Boston, Massachusetts. He was in his second year of a program at Boston University in aeronautical engineering, and a very bright guy. Took the test, decided he wanted to join the Tuskegee Airmen, join the 332nd, and passed. Left school, and that's a picture of him on the right. He's the gentleman in the front kneeling, and that's a picture as he was earning his wings in Tuskegee. Daniel Keel spent so much time in training that not only did he qualify as a bomber pilot, but he qualified as a bombardier and as a navigator as well. And he thought that after serving with the military for 3 years, he would be a shoo-in to win a job with the growing commercial airline industry following the war. But that wasn't to be because as he applied for jobs, he was told that the airlines had their racial quota of black pilots, although the first commercial airline pilot in the U.S. wasn't hired until the late 60s, early 70s. So Daniel Keel went back to college, earned his aeronautical engineering degree, and had a very successful career in business. Now, the photo on the left is something that popped up in my social media feed this summer. Daniel Keel, 102 years old, was the only Tuskegee Airman who was fit enough and able to travel freely over the course of the summer. And he was treated like a rock star in Italy at a number of events around the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. So one other thing I should say about Daniel Keel and the bomber crews is that 100 men who were in the bomber squadron were part of a mass court-martial case after they tried to desegregate an officers' club at a Air Force base in Indiana. A little-known fact, there actually were, I think, 3 separate mass court-martials of African-American troops during the war. One was at Fort Devens, a number of nurses, African-American nurses, who were basically relegated to custodial and janitorial jobs at a hospital and rehabilitation center for returning U.S. troops. And there was also a large court martial of about 75 men in California following a horrific explosion when they had black crews loading munitions on ships to go out to the South Pacific. And basically, the white officers that were in charge of the operation had pitted one team against another in sort of a race, betting money on it. And the horrific explosion that could be felt for 30 miles away, and there were a little over 500 men who were killed or wounded in that, and a number of them court-martialed, and those court-martials stayed in places until about 10 years ago. One other person with a New England connection, because a lot of people think that the Tuskegee Airmen came from the South and came from big cities, but the gentleman in the middle of that picture with the pith helmet is a gentleman from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. His name is Wallace Reed. In fact, just the other day, Sheila Reed spoke at an event that the Black Heritage Trail put on in town. And I've known Sheila Reed for probably 30 years, and we were having coffee about a year ago, and I was telling her about the presentations I'm doing, and she said, I think my uncle might have been a Tuskegee Airman. And I said, I've known you for a long time. I had no idea. So she told me his name, and I went home and did a little research, and sure enough, Wallace Reed graduated from Portsmouth High School, smart kid, went off to UNH. He was a mathematics major. He graduated in the top 10% of his class. And I'm not sure what he really aspired to do, but at that point, the Department of War, as was called then, realized that it needed something like 10,000 weather forecasters. And there were less than 100 in the whole military. So they put together an accelerated program at top universities around the country, and they looked for people who graduated near the tops of their classes, who had majored in various science programs. So as a math major, he qualified for that. He took the test, he qualified, and he spent the next 6.5 months at MIT in Boston. When he was finished with the program, he was sent off to Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama, where Wallace Reed helped set up a meteorological training program. So he trained men who served overseas in Italy with my dad as well. Wallace stayed in the military following the war, worked as a government employee, as a civil servant, I should say, and became the first African-American meteorologist for the National Weather Service as well. So they proved the critics were wrong by working twice as hard and demonstrating discipline, working together, cooperation, and help to change attitudes overall. Their actions protecting the bombers during the war helped lead to the integration of the military in 1948 by President Truman, which was roughly 20 years before the Civil Rights Act as well. Their efforts of the Tuskegee Airmen were officially acknowledged in 2007 when surviving documented original Tuskegee Airmen, like my dad, were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. And that's a photo that includes 5 of the best-known pilots, including Roscoe Brown there in the front, who was the first black pilot to shoot down a German jet. And they inspired others to achieve greatness for several generations. 2 years ago, I was very fortunate to take part in a event around the Oshkosh Air Show in Wisconsin. And that's a picture of C.Q. Brown in the center of 2 of the surviving Tuskegee Airmen who are still alive today, George Hardy and James Harvey. And C.Q. Brown at the time was the first African-American chief of staff of the U.S. Air Force. Of course, he went on to become the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as well. So it's really a story of determination and courage and overcoming adversity. People like my dad were able to stay in the military through the U.S. Army Air Force Reserve following the war. And then my dad was able to find a job with Lockheed Aviation, although it took him several years to get somebody to take him seriously. Worked there for several years and then had a long career with the Federal Aviation Administration, retiring in 1989. And then when people found out about his experience, began to go out on the speaking circuit to talk about his experiences as a Tuskegee Airman. At the time, he was probably one of the few non-pilots who was out on the road. And as he told us later on in life, uh, the ground crew, personnel, aircraft and airframe mechanics, and personnel who were there supporting the efforts in the wartime were actually on the ground longer than the pilots were. The pilots were there for usually somewhere between 50 or 60 missions, and then they would cycle back stateside and be replaced by new folks. So you really saw a lot of really interesting things and harrowing experiences as well. He had a camera with him, so a lot of the photos that I use in the presentation of photos that he took along the way. So again, I want to thank the Warner Historical Society for inviting me to participate in the program today, and also the Black Heritage Trail.
Whoops, my apologies. All right. So what I was saying is I really appreciated hearing these stories of both the past and the present about persistence, commitment, patriotism, as well as all of the people who supported veterans, who wanted to or needed to or were drafted into service. And these stories make up for us a more complete picture of who we are as a country, as a people. And so with that, we'd love to have folks ask questions of our presenters to elaborate on thoughts, ideas, take it a little further. And Jake, do you want, or somebody, am I doing that? Or shall I go ahead and talk about community dialogue? So as you see on the screen in front of you, group agreements, the way that we approach how we have these conversations. And so please be respectful and use respectful language. Please use the microphone, which I am. I listen generously to learn. Please don't interrupt. Share airtime and be crisp with your questions. Keep them to the point. Be mindful that good intentions can still have harmful impact and honor confidentiality. So, do we have some questions?
There are questions here.
Yeah.
That would be great
Yeah.
if you would take Laura's seat. That would be probably the easiest way to make a connection with everyone. Is that okay with you? Okay. Laura, there's one behind.
Yeah, but I can't, okay.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't set this up. This was very confusing. Hi, I also really enjoyed listening to the stories. I'm going to presume that the Black soldiers were not given the same rate of pay as the white soldiers were. If that is correct, when were they given equal pay and also equal opportunities for moving ahead in the military? Thank you.
I can take a part of this question for you if you'd like. As someone who's documented not just, and then I think Bob can probably elaborate perhaps on the Air Force, or there's a question in chat about the airmen claiming military VA benefits. What I would say for pay regarding the American Revolution, the pay was the same for Black soldiers as it was for white. However, with one caveat, some masters took that pay that their enslaved man earned and kept that as payment for gaining their freedom. However, if a free Black man served in the American Revolution, he was paid the same as his white counterpart and received the same benefits after the war, including land out west a free suit of clothes and things like that. That would, by the time of the Civil War, pay was a huge differential. White soldiers were paid more during the Civil War than black soldiers who served in segregated regiments. And this would not be fully resolved really until the Korean War. In World War II, there was no such thing as equality. And even though there was an executive order signed by the president in 1947 regarding equity in the military branches, in practicality, we did not see that during the Korean until partway during the Korean War, and in all practicality, really not until the Vietnam War. I hope that answers your question. I can't speak to the airmen claiming military benefits that I believe Suzanne posted a question, but Bob, maybe you know the answer to that.
Yeah, I have heard from some of the men who served back during World War II that they had difficulty in collecting their veterans benefits, in being able to go to college. They really had to work twice as hard. And I think when they were in the field, when they were deployed to first North Africa and then to Italy, they had to make do under some rather austere conditions. Part of it was that they were closer to the front line and it took longer for supplies to get to them than to other groups that were further back. But they really had to endure some very difficult periods. And as I mentioned, in terms of being relegated to non-combat roles for a good bit of their time overseas, I think it was, in talking with the gentlemen, you hear a great deal of frustration in their voices, but they were able to really hold it together and prove that they had what it took to be able to be on the front line to face off against the enemy and stand up to enemy aggressors.
Thank you. Thank you. I forgot to mention, also, if you want to raise your digital hand, your Zoom hand, we can unmute you for questions as well. Let's see. There we go. Oh, yes. We have another live question, in-person question.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Jenkins, and I'm a Vietnam area vet. I live in Sacramento, California, so it's really a privilege to be here to listen to this. I didn't realize the history of Blacks in this part of the United States. I didn't know anything really about Black history until I got out of the military and moved to Oakland, California, and went to a community college there, which had a very strong African American history program. But this is something new to me, so I asked, are there a lot of books about this area as far as African American soldiers and people that from this area? I know that abolitionists were in Boston. We toured that yesterday, but I didn't realize that there's so much Black history up here. So my question is, are there literature or books that I can purchase about this history?
I can start here. First of all, Bill, thank you for your service. I really appreciate that. And I think especially the Vietnam vets, you guys had it really tough over there, and you're a perfect example of a group that came home that didn't get the recognition you deserved at first. So thank you for that service. As far as the American Revolutionary War soldiers, I've actually written a book called Strong and Brave Fellows. You can pick it up online, or you can get in touch with me via email. And it documents some of the things, although we're talking about today, although in much greater detail. There are also other books on the subject that you can simply Google, American Revolution / Black soldiers, and you'll find a number of reference works out there, many of them well written, that talk about this very important aspect of our military history. And same thing, there's a lot of types of books like this. There's a lot of books about the Tuskegee Airmen, as well as many of the different African American units and experiences during World War II and certainly the Civil War.
Thank you.
I'll put in a pitch for two books. One is Tuskegee Airman, autobiography of Charles McGee, who was a gentleman who served in three wars. He flew P-51s in World War II. He flew piston engine aircraft in the Korean War and then switched over to jets. And then he was still in the military during the Vietnam War. He flew F-4 Phantoms in reconnaissance as well. He passed away about 4 years ago and really was a rock star. And then the other one is a book called Red Tail Captured, Red Tail Free, and it's memoirs of Alexander Jefferson, who was a gentleman who was portrayed in the movie Masters of the Air that came out on Apple TV about a year or two ago. He was shot down on one of his missions over southern France. And when the plane came down, he parachuted in and he was interrogated. And the Germans were convinced that he was a passenger in the plane. They didn't think that he was a pilot. But really documents his time in several prisoners of war camp during the war. And it's a great read as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope my wife wrote those down so I can purchase them. Thank you.
We can also send you a list after the program if she hasn't.
Okay, thank you.
And if you want some help with the questions, I will help you out. Since you have to keep moving. Charles has his hand raised, and we can go to that question, and then Susan, and then there's another one in the chat.
Yeah, I've got a comment and a question. The comment is to Glenn, and I've learned through the Black Heritage Trail that there was a group of slaves in New Hampshire that petitioned to the New Hampshire government for their freedom. And it was just recently that they've been, their petition had been signed. So it took the New Hampshire government many years before they were able to free the slaves here in New Hampshire. My other comment is to Bob. Heron High School is still in existence. I enrolled in Heron High School, and then I was unsure of the academic quality to go to college, because when I was there, they still had piston-driven planes, and that was in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So I was questioning the skill level that I would have attained in Heron High School.
So Heron does still exist. It's out near JFK Airport, and I have a cousin who was about 8 years younger than me who went through the program and then ended up working for one of the airlines. They have upgraded, and they're one of a number of schools around the country, technical colleges that are set up that do a lot of training, along with schools like Emory-Riddle, and there are a number of private colleges as well. But it's a field where, unfortunately, still there's very little representation from both black pilots and women as well. In the Air Force, I think African-American pilots make up maybe 3 or 4% of the total, and women as well. So there are great opportunities, and a lot of the presentations that I do are with a group that maintains a P-51 Mustang and has a couple documentaries, one on the Tuskegee Airmen and one on the women Air Force service pilots. In fact, it was just at the Aviation Museum of New Hampshire in Manchester. And the effort is to try and encourage young people to consider STEM careers, to work in the aerospace industry. There are some great opportunities in the military, but also on the civilian side. And now, as we see with commercial companies that are getting involved in space launches in that area as well.
The other thing I wanted to comment on, that the bomber pilots requested in a lot of cases for the Tuskegee Airmen for their support because they were so good at what they did.
Yeah, they comprised an impressive record. One of the myths of the Tuskegee Airmen that I'm very careful to talk to people about is that there was a myth that they never lost a bomber under their escort, and they flew something like 180 escort missions. They lost 27 bombers during their time as escorts, but the average for other fighter groups in the 15th Air Force that they were part of in Italy was 46. So they did much better than average, and they stuck with the bombers, which is part of the reason they didn't have a lot of pilots that became aces, because they hung in there with the B-17s and the B-24s, protected them, helped them get to their targets, and then back home safely.
Thank you.
Bob.
Charles, if I could comment on your earlier learning through the Black History Trail about the New Hampshire petition by 20 enslaved men in Portsmouth. That indeed did happen. Now, you should know that the New Hampshire government during that time, the colonial government there, tabled that. They did publish it in the New Hampshire Gazette, but almost as if to make fun of it. Nothing was ever done. And I think it's been about 10, maybe even 15 years ago that Maggie Hassan, when she was governor of New Hampshire, did finally grant that petition in a symbolic gesture of recognition, if you will. I don't remember the exact date that she did that. So that document has long been known, although ignored by earlier generations of historians, I believe. But yes, that was out there, and New Hampshire government finally did something symbolic to change that. I might also mention in the chat, there's a follow-up question from Katie, and she asked, what are your reflections or learnings from the history of equal pay in the Revolutionary War? What conditions allowed for that? Understanding that in later wars, it was unequal, in other words, backwards movement, not progress. I think for the American Revolution yet, we didn't have a structured government yet. So there was no what I would call institutional racism at that point. Had we had an established government with an established army with established pay, then there certainly would have been an inequality. But that was not a factor in this early. So it was almost by happenstance, to be honest with you. I can't say, no historian can say that it was deliberate. Oh, we believe that all men are equal and therefore they should be paid equal. That certainly wasn't the case. It was more happenstance, and there was no mechanism for that. And I think what I would say I've learned is that it's the mechanism of oppression or racism or whatever you want to call it that developed very quickly in our country that resulted in that pay inequity and service inequity that would not be solved until, well after World War II.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Susan? And then Becky.
Yes, I primarily wanted to ask about the end of World War II, but there's something similar in my question that also applies to the Revolutionary War. I'm interested in the fact that people of color were serving in the militaries of colonized countries in World War II, and I'm wondering if the Tuskegee Airmen in their service would run across this kind of thing where the armies were supported, they were engaging with Ethiopians in some cases. Ethiopia was one of those countries. Algeria had those kind of military, and all over the world, immediately after World War II, these colonized people would celebrate liberation and hope for decolonization, independence, and liberty. And I just wonder how that went down. And in the case of the Revolutionary War, I'm wondering, weren't there Black soldiers also on the English side fighting for England in some cases?
Let me answer that as far as the English goes. Yes, Black soldiers. The British did try to enlist Black soldiers. The most famous of those groups was Lord Dunmore's regiment in Virginia. It was an unsuccessful attempt because the enslaved were not dumb. They saw that the British were really not going to arm them. They tried in Virginia. They had one battle, but especially in the South, white enslavers were very uncomfortable with arming the enslaved, thought they might turn on their masters. And so they really employed the enslaved to do the most menial work, digging fortifications, ditches, and things like that. And that was not much of an incentive toward freedom, although some of them were carried away as the British troops were evacuated. And some, of course, were transported to Nova Scotia, where they did gain their freedom. But I think most of these individuals, we have examples in the South. For example, Francis Marion, nicknamed the Swamp Fox, who fought the British in South Carolina, did employ runaway enslaved in his guerrilla type warfare. But the British and those who were loyal to the crown, the white enslavers, kept a very close eye on them. In the North, it should be understood that no Southern colony, so when we talk about the Continental Army, nobody below the colony of Pennsylvania enlisted black soldiers officially in the Continental Army. As a matter of fact, Alexander Graydon, a noted officer in a Maryland regiment, said it was offensive to him and his men to serve alongside New England troops, which included men of color. So Pennsylvania had some black soldiers, not a great amount. New York had a few. New Jersey had a few. But most of them came from Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, certainly, and of course, New Hampshire. So even that's why I did my disclaimer when we talked about equality. It's equality in terms of Northern soldiers. So if that answers your question.
Thank you. Bob?
So there was a gentleman from Georgia, an African American, Eugene Bulliard, who's actually served as a pilot for the French in World War I. But there was great resistance here in the U.S., again, as I said in my presentation, to having African American officers. So there are Tuskegee Airmen who attempted, as was the case with a lot of white soldiers as well, who tried to sign up with the Royal Canadian Air Force because Canada was involved in the war before we were. And they tried to sign up and become pilots and fly over there. I'm not aware of instances of their interaction with some of the folks, as you mentioned. There were, though, folks from outside the U.S. who trained as Tuskegee Airmen. There were black pilots from the Dominican Republic and from Haiti, and I think several other countries as well who served. And I'm not sure where they served because there were squadrons during World War II made up of expatriates from various countries, French and other Polish groups as well. But that's a very good question. I will have to try to do some research on that.
Thank you.
Becky?
Yeah, I find this all very interesting that history and the stories are so important, not only for us looking back, but also for us evaluating how far we've come. And I've heard a few questions and comments along this line of trying to think about what does this mean for what we're doing today? And I work a lot with immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers. And especially listening to Glenn's presentation, I kept thinking of the number of places in the words and the statements that you were making where we could easily substitute refugees or immigrants in those terms. So many of them have gone into the military with hopes of citizenship and very often been denied it at the end. So, and the discrimination and yet the incredible hard work that a lot of the people from other countries have contributed to both our military and our society. So, but I guess that's just more of a comment, but it just really helps me to give some thought to the sort of a perspective of where we're going with all of this. And I'd welcome your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Well, I think Katie commented using the term we're going backwards. We are kind of going backwards today. Make no mistake about that. We are taking away recognition from, African Americans who have served in the military. I don't know where we go from here, but we're not in a good place now. If we can't recognize diversity and recognize the contributions of all people, how can we call ourselves a complete country? And I think, that's something we're going to have to change at the voting booth probably. But right now, I hear your stories there. We have immigrants who have served nobly, in some cases decorated, that have served in the Army and the Air Force that have been deported, and that's deplorable. It shouldn't happen, but yet it is. And I don't know what the answer to that is, other than greater awareness of what everyone is contributing to our military. And it's interesting, really since the Vietnam War, we have come to honor and cherish veterans, and yet we can deport veterans of color or veterans who, you know, whether they came here illegally or they're not nationalized, naturalized, I don't know, but that just seems very wrong to me.
Yeah, I want to just pop up a slide here again, if I could. I didn't get to show this, but so my dad was the first generation born in America of his family. His father and mother immigrated here from the West Indies in the 1920s at a time when there were very strict quotas on people coming from that part of the world, especially people of color. And his father had served in World War I with the British West Indies Expeditionary Force in Mesopotamia or current day Iraq. But this is the one that I just wanted to show you, a new slide that I've added to my presentation. There are government websites that I've been using for 15 years to check names, dates, photos, and whatnot. And since February, more and more often, this is what I'm getting. When I'm pulling up information on the Tuskegee Airmen, the 6 888, the women who served to move the mail during World War II, there was a movie that released earlier this year about them. The Navajo Code Talkers, the women air service pilots who did everything that men did during World War II except combat. They flew aircraft from factories, they tested aircraft, they trained pilots, they towed targets for artillery crews to fire at, which is about as dangerous as combat can get as well. And they were released summarily right after the end of the war. But more and more often when I'm doing research, this is what I'm getting. Those pages are gone. And I have to wonder, where are those pages? Will they ever come back? There's so much important information, and this is our shared combined history. It's everybody's history. And it's information that I think Americans in the last 10 or 15 years, as these veterans from World War II have gotten older, and we realize that we need to hear their stories, it's so critical that we can continue to share the tales of veterans from World War II.
Interestingly, as the gentleman was asking earlier, there are a lot of published resources out there, both for World War II, the American Revolution, but in an increasingly digitalized world, removing valuable and factual historical content, especially from government websites, is a deliberate action, and it's a wrong one. So I don't know how that changes other than we get a change of administration. But, we can complain to our congressman. I think, at least here in New Hampshire, I think we have sympathetic people who are already on that. But so that just means when that information is scrubbed, the average citizen has to work harder to obtain that information. And luckily, talks like this help illuminate that history. So I thank the folks in Warner and the Black History Trail for doing their part. But it's always nice when the government cooperates.
Thank you, Glenn. Is it okay if I ask a question?
Of course.
So my question really, I know we're almost close to time, is this idea of belonging that Revolutionary War veterans and World War II and all the wars that African Americans fought for a sense to belong to this country. How do you think these men handled this question of belonging when the country, the people that their space in the army, their roles in these military service, everything told them that they didn't belong. They were segregated. They were not given proper training, yet put in combat to perish, and not given enough pay after they left, not recognized after their time of service. And I mean, the list of not being treated equally goes on and on. And last talk, we had they were, that even though training was available to all, it was denied to individuals if they were people of color. So this whole sense of belonging and patriotism seems very complex to me when we look at military service.
Bob, you want to take that first and I can add on?
In talking to these gentlemen, the resolve, Jerry, that they had to, again, work twice as hard against just formidable obstacles in their path is incredible. I think that Charles McGee mentioned that, and he's the guy that served in 3 wars, 409 missions altogether, 100 combat missions in each of the wars. But after World War II, he said when he got back into New York Harbor and he walked down the gangplank, there was a guy at the bottom of the landing that said, "Whites to the left, blacks to the right." And, I think they saw German POWs who were getting better treatment or equal treatment to what they were.
Better.
Better. You're probably right. Right. Yeah, they were really the greatest generation. They had survived the Great Depression. They worked hard and nose to the grindstone, and somehow they persevered through it all.
Let me speak to that in terms of the American Revolution and World War II. A lot of my work with Harvard and Oxford University had to do with documenting significant African Americans who served during World War II. So that's another wheelhouse of mine. But for the American Revolution, we see it in our books. For example, we talk about their contributions. We wanted them because we needed them. We needed men to fight, and that was true during World War II and the American Revolution. And there is something to that, group of men, camaraderie in the trenches, so to speak, and men getting the job done. But the minute they returned home or to their communities, whether it's the American Revolution or World War II, it's back to the old standard, and it's the standard of inequality, right? And some, white veterans refuse to support their black brethren. Others, work to try and change things. And even in our town histories, for example, if you look in the town history of Walpole, New Hampshire, the town historian there writes about the 12 men that went to serve in the American Revolution from that town. He could remember the names of 11 of them. The 12th man, who was a man named Cato Marcy, who was killed in action at the Battle of Monmouth, he couldn't remember his name. And he said, no matter, 'twas a black man anyway. That was in the town history of Walpole. Now, we have the town history of Sutton, where Augusta Worthen makes these fine comments about Anthony Clark. Yet Walter Harriman, in a history of Warner, kind of denigrates his service and says, well, he was just a waiter or whatever. So we see these dichotomies in how that history, how that narrative is told. And the same thing is true for World War II. These men were vitally needed. We needed the Tuskegee Airmen to protect those bombers. We needed black men to serve aboard submarines. That's a topic I've written about. And but the minute they stepped on U.S. soil or Hawaiian soil and returned home, it was back to the old standard, and it was forgetting what these men had done for their country, not for them, for their country. And I suspect Mr. Jenkins may agree about Vietnam veterans coming home and how they were treated. So it's been a long tradition in our history, and it's a bad one. So,
yes, thank you. As far as Vietnam vets, as African Americans, there were two groups of us: the ones that got drafted and the ones that volunteered. I got drafted. I went kicking and screaming. My dad told me, you got to go because I don't have the money that Cassius Clay has. Muhammad Ali, of course. So you go, so I went. And there were those who wanted to go to better their life. Not that my life was that good, but a lot of them came from the South, the rural South. They wanted to better themselves. Some of them might have came from the inner cities. And they wanted to make a career out of it, which was fine. So I think that I did my 2 years. I got out. And some of the guys I know that I go to church with, several of them did 20, 25 years. They did well. And I don't know how they felt about being treated differently. I know it touched me, the Army or military had been integrated for, I guess, 20 years, when Vietnam came along. So, but it was still problems that I saw, So I think that some wanted to stay regardless of how they were treated in and out once they got out. But I was glad to do my 2 years and get out. Thank you.
Just a couple, thank you for your comments. I really appreciate it. Just a couple of comments about that. Even though integration began during the Korean War, a lot of that at the lower level dragged on. And so opportunities that captains and colonels and lower officers had to give to their men were still withheld. So I would question, in terms of separating men by regiments or units, yes, that was over by the time of Vietnam. But as far as opportunities for the future, that was definitely, black soldiers were not given the same opportunities and things like that. I'll tell you another story too. I've written a lot about African Americans who served in the Navy and the submarine force during World War II. One of the most decorated of these men was Walter Pye Wilson, who later retired to Portsmouth and worked at the shipyard there. He served 13 missions on the submarine Trigger and gained the highest renown for his service. But yet, when he returned home to the city of San Diego, a military town, and he was walking to his home, a white woman stopped him on the street and slapped him in the face and said, "Why are you wearing that uniform? You're a colored man." And that's not the word she used, by the way.
Sure.
So once you step back on American soil, especially for the men after World War II, it was a different story. So,
yeah. Well,
thank you, Mr. Jenkins.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I think we are getting near to the end here. Bob, I just have a really quick question. When I saw your talk last, you had mentioned that there was a mobile Tuskegee or mobile history van that was going to schools and thinking about where are we going from here. Is that still working? Is it still going around? Do you know anything about it?
Yes, it is. So it's a squadron of the Commemorative Air Force, and they're the group that, as I mentioned earlier, they maintain a P-51 Mustang that flies. And then it's a tractor trailer truck that folds out into a movie theater. It can seat about 40 people at a time. And we've got two documentaries, one on the Tuskegee Airmen, one on the women air service pilots. And we came up to the Aviation Museum of Manchester in August for 3 days. And they had some of the biggest crowds this year. They had over 500 people a day, and that's compared to the air show in Oshkosh and a number of shows at military bases and other facilities around the South. They're very anxious to come back. We're talking with the museum about the possibility of coming into the Manchester airport next summer sometime. Also, the New England Air Museum down in Hartford, Connecticut has expressed some interest, and there's an air show in Brunswick, Maine, I think in August or September of next year. So there's a possibility. And they're anxious to get back up here. They haven't had an opportunity to get up to New England very often. I think that they realize that there are a lot of people here that have an interest in this. There are a number of Tuskegee Airmen with connections to the region as well. So stay tuned. You may hear about it during the course of the year. Yeah.
Bob, you must let the trail know. We have a newsletter. This is perfect for the newsletter. Please let us know.
Will do. Count on it.
Thank you. So we're at the end of our time. And so I just again want to thank our presenters and our guests for sharing stories, history, that belongs to all of us. And the more we know, the better we are. And so we thank you for that. Also, thank you to our sponsors. This program would not be possible without the generosity of New Hampshire Humanities. And also to remind you of a couple upcoming programs. So here is October 5th. A small New Hampshire town remembers its Black history. Our tour guides are our Warner locals here, Rebecca Corser and Lynn Clark, exploring the Black history of the village of Waterloo, or as they say up here, I believe it's Waterloo. And it will include the village school, train station, Camp Newton, a summer camp for children whose parents were overseas missionaries, and homes that Black people worked in, owned, or rented. Employers Nehemiah Ordway, a one-time governor of the Dakota Territories, and U.S. Senator William E. Chandler summered in Waterloo and ties the little village into national politics. Please register for this program. It will be here in the town hall. And also, don't forget another wonderful opportunity on October 25th, the 19th annual Black New England Conference held at Southern New Hampshire University, entitled The State of the Union, A Critical Perspective on Black America from 1776 to 2026. So please take note of those, and turn it back to Jerry Ann.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to our host at the Warner Historical Society for leading this discussion. Thank you to our visitors who stayed on and engaged in the conversation. There is so much that we learned, so much that is the same, so much that has changed. I see we have a talk up for October 4th that we are partnering with St. Paul's Church, Things They Carried, an African-American philosophy on war. And this is looking from the same war story, but looking from it from the spiritual lens, African spirituality. So join us then for that talk on Saturday, October 4th in Concord. Thank you, everyone. In this day and age when we are erasing Black history, removing it from government sites, threatening teachers so that they can't teach the subjects in their classrooms, really putting them on blast. It is good to know that we have a community of interested people who can keep this alive, because it changes our perception. We grow together, it builds bridges and create these avenues for understanding and growth. And if a small number of us keep gathering, that number will grow and we will become the majority. Our voice will be stronger and we can input the change that we want to see. So it takes all of us doing this work, and I really appreciate you being here as one of the steps that we can do to break these stereotypes and build these bridges of understanding. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Glenn. We'll have to figure out what we're doing for next year for the 2020, the 250th anniversary, that everything is changing. What was planned is changing. It's a whole different world than when we started a year ago.
Well, you know where to find me.
I know where to find you. It was so interesting. I was going to talk about as we had a submariner on our last talk, and it was interesting to understand that, one, he didn't get any training when he was there, but he had to learn the things on his own. But in order to be on the submarine, he had to know everything like the other submariners. So learning on his own and able to pass all those exams, break that stereotypes that Black men are just not intelligent and can't be leaders and can't work this.
You should check out my book on that subject. I've written a whole book on that.
Yeah, we actually have it at
nice
our shop.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating story, but I appreciate